So here is a whole, what we would call ribeye roll. So this is the ribeye again, and this would be prime rib if you wanted to buy this and cook it as prime rib. If you wanted to buy this and cook it, and actually you said, well, I don't need quite that much prime rib. Gosh, you can actually cut ribeye steaks off of here until you get the size of the portion you want to cook for prime rib. It's still prime rib, along with some ribeye steaks. This is in a vacuum bag. So we want to do the same thing with this as we did with the cuts that we talked about there, from a fresh cut that's overwrapped at the store, that's oxygenated, those kind of things. These need to be handled the same way in terms of get them home, get them in the refrigerator as quickly as possible. You may need to do some work on these after you get them home. These may be actually a little less in terms of price per pound, just because they did come from the packer in this bag. The retailers only had to put them out in the case and offer them for sale. So we've got a different kind of product here. It's the same mussels, but a little different kind of product because it is boneless and it is vacuum packaged, which causes some good things as well as bad. For one, it's a great way to extend the shelf life of this product. So these products can be aged for a number of days in this vacuum bag, and it's called wet aging when we do this. It's wet aging because this is a sealed product that has no oxygen inside the bag to speak of. It's very low in terms of oxygen rate. It's all been pulled out. And so any bacteria that might grow in there that would cause spoilage really can't grow because they need air to grow. Here they don't have it. So it does extend the shelf life of this as long as we're providing the right amount of refrigeration to let that sit in there. It works better if we can keep it at the same temperature. So a lot of our home refrigerators, when we open and close the doors, the temperature goes up and down and up and down and up and down. If we're in a cooler like we have here at Rosenthal Center, or if you've got a refrigerator, a second refrigerator that you don't open as much, this would be a good place to put this, because the longer you can keep the temperature at the same temperature, it does a better job and has a longer shelf life. However, all vacuum packaged products, pretty much when you open the bag, are going to have what we call vacuum packaged odor. And when you have that little bit of that odor, it may have kind of a sour smell to it. And don't be alarmed, because we expect that to be there. And what that is a different bacteria called lactic acid bacteria actually produces some lactic acid. Well, there's lactic acid in the mussel as well. So it's not that it's creating anything that's not already there. But those bacteria sometimes create enough of that we get a little bit of that odor, and we're concerned that maybe it is it's going to create an off flavor, or it's spoiled, or those kind of things, and it is not. If you can let it open the bag, as we're going to do, and let it sit there for maybe 10 to 15 minutes, something like that, at the most, because we don't want it to get room temperature. But in a few minutes, that vacuum, that smell, that vacuum package odor should dissipate or go away. I opened the package with a knife and made sure that I didn't cut into the meat itself. And I did that more on this side, the bottom side of the ribeye. We didn't come along here where we might make a cut that would cut into the lean. We actually came along this side because we're going to do a little trimming on this side as well. So if I happen to cut into these muscles along the bottom side of the ribeye, I'm still okay. But I don't want to cut into my surface there where I'm going to really have the showpiece at the end of your cooking. So that's why we open the bag from this side. I'm also kind of careful in that there is going to, most of the time, be some moisture inside this bag. And most of the time it's going to be a reddish color, a reddish purplish color. We refer to that as purge. And it's actually water, because meat is 70-some-odd% water, that has some pigment associated with it. That's the pigment that causes meat to be red color that we call myoglobin. Now, there are people that will say, oh my gosh, it's red. It's got to be, it has blood in there. And it's really, truly not blood as much as it is myoglobin, the pigment that really causes meat to be red in color. So we pull that out, any of that moisture, and some of them will have more than this. This one has a little bit. We're going to go ahead and discard that. Don't try to use it, incorporate it into anything like that. Go ahead and just throw it away. We look at the whole ribeye. Now we're looking a lot like the one that we showed you, the two pieces that we showed you earlier. It does have a little bit of extra fat right here along the top. We might cut off just a little bit, but for the most part, this side, the top side of this cut, really needs no help. All we've got to do now is season it. So we'll season this with our spices in a few minutes. But for the most part, it doesn't need a lot, just maybe a little trimming. Along the top side, the side more toward the vertebra that came off of here, this is the tail. This would be the top of the animal. Top of the vertebra came off of this cut right here. There they are on the whole primal rib. And sometimes there's a little bit of what we refer to as bone skin, or periosteum is the actual name of that are along that where those spinous processes were. If I was going to make this where I had the best eating experience I could have, I would come in here with a knife, go ahead and remove those pieces of that bone skin or periosteum, just to be sure that my guest had the best eating experience that they could have. It's not going to be very deep, so all we're trying to do is just skim the surface of the ribeye because it's tough. And as it dries out during cooking, it will be even tougher. Okay, so we would do that. Because most of the ribs were removed off of this cut, if you notice, here's one with the ribs on. Here's one where the rib bones have been removed, but a lot of this on the in between the ribs, the muscles that were in between the ribs were left on this rib, and that's kind of common in the way these are packaged. And so what I'm going to do is remove those. A lot of times we'll call that rib finger meat or intercostal muscles. They're not nearly as tender as is the ribeye that lays underneath. So as long as I'm keeping that all flush with the surface, all I'm cutting is those rib fingers. I think the biggest thing I would do with the rib fingers, and maybe a portion of the tail will take off, I think that makes a really, you could use that in stock, in soup, in stews, anything along those lines that you're going to do some kind of high moisture cooking. Okay? Now the tail on this we discussed could be up to 2 inches long. This one's really not quite that long, but we might want to cut it down to about 1 inch or so just to clean this up just a little bit. So what we did is I just looked at the end of the ribeye muscle and measured about 1 inch from that. And on the other side, the same thing, looked at the end of the ribeye muscle, came out about 1 inch to make that cut. And then just cut all the way to the table. So there is some lean portion that was salvageable on this, on the tail portion. If you're going to cut those rib fingers off, this works really well to go right along with that. If it's cold weather here, if it's a Christmas prime rib you're making, this might work really well for a stew a little later or even before. This now becomes, and when we do that, we maybe actually have a little bit of a shelf of fat there. Just trim that down just a little bit, kind of bevel it down or angle it down just a little bit. But now we have a whole ribeye roll that we could cook as a whole prime rib that I would guess would feed somewhere between 16 and 20 people according to the size of the portions that you wanted to give out and the size of the portions that people were wanting to do. I usually estimate somewhere 16, 17 people per ribeye roll. But it's ready to now be seasoned. And again, like we said before, I think the whole thing about when we talk about seasoning is go ahead and season this pretty liberally. You don't have to just sprinkle salt and pepper. You can actually rub this pretty have it pretty well covered, because again, we're only seasoning the outside.